Welcome to Spy School, the show that lifts the lid on the techniques of the world's most secret intelligence agencies.
Yes, from losing a tail to recruiting a double agent, Spy School has everything you need to know.
And I'm here to make sure these two are up to the job. My name's David Shaler. I used to work for British intelligence.
Coming up, we examine information exchange and retrace the footsteps of KGB spies to discover how they passed top-secret messages to each other in Cold War London. I'll be advising on the best precautions to take against unwanted intruders, and we speak to controversial journalist Philip Knightley about the British traitor Kim Philby, who spied for the Soviets.
First up, information exchange. Dead letterboxes are used by secret services all around the world when agents need to pass each other intelligence.
A dead letterbox, or dead drop if you work for the CIA, is the safest way of swapping information if it's considered too dangerous for the two agents involved to meet personally.
In essence, it is a secret location where agent and handler can exchange intelligence, usually by leaving it in a secret container. I'll be advising these two on the best way to perform the procedure.
Hi, David.
Hi there, hi. How's it going?
Good, I think.
Not too bad, not too bad. We've got various things in here to conceal.
What do you think of the spot?
I think you've chosen a very good spot, actually, because you've got, from your point of view, you've got very clear lines of sight up and down, so you can see anybody who might be approaching you or might be following you. And also there's lots of natural cover, like the bridge and so on, which will give you opportunities to disappear from surveillance, even if it's just for a few seconds or a few minutes or whatever. So it's a good spot.
Lorna now has to identify a location suitable for a discreet drop-off. The KGB had hundreds of such sites scattered around London during the Cold War.
I've had a look around. I can't really see anyone. If anyone is watching me, then they'll be on the move too. I have to just make sure I do this as subtly as possible.
Lorna's opted for that old espionage rendezvous point, the park bench. It provides good cover and a multitude of reasons for stopping there, but the actual drop-off must be smooth and innocuous. Notorious CIA spies Aldrich Ames and Robert Hansen were both caught in flagrante, so to speak, during a dead drop.
I've dropped off the film. Now all I need to do is inform the handler, who in this case is Julian, where the dead letterbox is. Now the KGB in situations like this have been known to use orange peel, and that's what I'm going to use today.
The problem with these things is that they're not like in films.
Right.
You'll appreciate that when they happen in real life, because you're being secretive and you can't communicate openly, that creates an enormous margin of error. I mean, I can think of one case with Hong Kong Special Branch, who were actually working with MI5 on a training exercise. And of course, what you're supposed to do in the training exercise is behave as everything is real. But at the same time, the Metropolitan Police were actually doing an operation against some triads. And so when they saw all these guys hanging around very suspiciously of Chinese descent, they arrested them all. And the Chinese, the Hong Kong Special Branch people actually thought this was part of the exercise, so they didn't break cover. It was only when they'd been in the cell for about 6 hours that one of them actually sort of looked at his watch and thought, hang on, perhaps we better say something here, because we're going to be stuck in this place overnight, kind of thing. And they had to send down the MI5 lawyers to get them out.
Right. Aha! Finally.
Right.
Finally.
Okay.
Finally. Some orange peel.
So if you're doing this in real life, the last thing you want to do is try to point to it. What you're doing in real life, you probably pause.
No.
If you smoke, just stop, get a cigarette out, have a look around, see if anybody's doing anything. Then you've got some sort of idea of where your pickup's going to be.
Right.
So what you're going to be doing is probably counting about 30 paces from here. In this circumstance, you'd actually, because you've been seen from over there, you would try and use your natural cover from this side to pick things up from over there.
Right. Okay, so I think I've identified the film. I think it's in the cigar case to the left of me behind the bench. As David pointed out, there are people that way. There doesn't seem to be anyone on that side. So the natural thing to do would be to be on this side of the bench and try and pick it up over here. Now the problem is it's actually behind the bench, so any kind of movement down there is going to be slightly unnatural. I think possibly the best way to do it would be to take my gloves out of my pockets and drop them and try and pick it up as discreetly as possible. All right, I've retrieved it. I've put the gloves on. No one seems to be watching. I'll make a swift exit.
Later on in the show, we'll show how to perform a brush contact, which is done when the two agents don't have time to organise a dead drop.
Now, Spy Hard, our guide to the most deadly moves in martial arts, used by secret agencies around the world. Here, Gavin Mulholland demonstrates the Goju Ryu way of taking out an armed attacker.
My name is Gavin Mulholland. I've been involved in martial arts for 34 years, and I hold black belts in 4 different combat systems. Okay, when dealing with a kosh, a club, or any blunt instrument, you can't back away into the line of the weapon. And now we have options. In the East, where a lot of the special forces techniques came from ninjutsu and the old ninja and samurai styles, more likely to be using techniques such as strikes to the carotid artery. It sends confusing messages to the pressure sensors in the brain, cause immediate knockout. In the West, far more likely to be using punch techniques into the temple, into the thinnest bit of bone in the skull. Or we're striking elbow techniques under the nose, top lip, driving it in to break the nose, very painful top lip strikes. Bit of a myth that you strike the nose here, you're going to drive cartilage into the brain. There is a possibility, however, if it was true, we'd have no rugby players, no boxers. All these techniques are extremely dangerous. Don't try any of this at home.
Coming up later on Spy School, we reveal the sites chosen by the KGB for their dead letter drops in Cold War London, and in the Assassination Files, a case of the measles, as we look at the attempted murder of Russian writer Alexander Solzhenitsyn.
Now on the show, the Tomlinson tapes. Disgraced ex-spy Richard Tomlinson was sacked from his MI6 job. He now refuses to return to the country he formerly served. Here, in a rare interview, he discloses details of MI6 operations, including the time they stole a Russian armoured personnel carrier.
During the 1990s, we heard that the Russians had developed a very fast and capable armoured personnel carrier whose performance was far superior to anything in the British Army or indeed in the American Army. And so it fell upon MI6 to try and get hold of an example of this piece of kit in order to study how good it was. We learnt they were in the process of selling a whole batch of these of the detuned export version of these armoured personnel carriers to a country in the Middle East, the United Arab Emirates. Now these versions, export versions, were nothing like as capable as the Russian Army's own version. But using an informer who was a very influential arms dealer in Russia, we were able to arrange for one of these special Russian-only versions to be slipped into the export versions to the United Arab Emirates. Of course, we had to pay a lot of money to this informer for them to be done. It was about £100,000, I believe. But of course, it was well worth it. And one of these special Russian-only versions of the BMP-3 was slipped into the export versions. As they were shipped out via Gdansk harbour in Poland, we managed to put the special one on a train, and that was ended up in England. But that was a classic MI6 operation, which basically was a very, very valuable operation for the British Army. It gave them a lot of very useful intelligence, and in the long term saved them a lot of money.
Cutout. A cutout is a person who acts as an intermediary between two members of the intelligence services. Cutouts are used to improve security by preventing contact between agents and to protect their identity.
We return now to the training exercise on secure information exchange. Lorna, Julian and I found a busy street in London where you could practice the discreet art of the brush contact, a fleeting rendezvous which requires careful preparation so it can be performed even under close surveillance.
Okay, Julian and Lorna, we've done the dead letterbox. What we're going to do now is the brush contact. Something you would be doing this for would be usually in an urgent situation where you haven't got time to set up a dead letterbox. You would have some sort of contact between the officer and the agent at short notice, and what you'd be telling the agent is to be in a certain place at a certain time. You're not going to stop and talk to them. You're not even going to actually put it in their hand. As you walk past, you're going to very subtly drop it into their bag, hoping that no one will see that. Right, this is the film canister.
Right.
And the job you have to do as the intelligence officer is get it to your agent in the field without being detected.
Okay.
Your job is to try and take possession of the package but without letting on that you even know him at all.
Right.
So the key issue here is whatever you do, don't make eye contact with him. Don't flinch when he walks past, just stand there normally, and hopefully you won't even know he's put it in there if he does it right. We're going to need somewhere where there's a fair amount of hustle and bustle. Obviously, the more hustle and bustle there is, the less chance you're going to be detected by a surveillance team as you pass the canister over. Right. I think something like this here, which is absolutely ideal because you're on a corner, you've got a bus stop, that means that people are standing there and there's no suspicion attached to people standing there at all. Perhaps you just have a quick practice now, just trying to subtly drop the thing into your bag.
Yeah.
Right, good. Except don't do it like that.
How do I do it?
Just, I mean, the thing to do is don't take it out of your pocket until the last possible moment.
Right.
Walk your hands in your pockets, it's cold. Okay. That's your excuse. Sure. At the last couple of seconds before you're about to go out, just quickly take your bag, hand out of there, then drop.
Okay.
Right, let's go.
The brush contact, when carried out with the correct protocol, is almost foolproof. And it has the advantage over the dead drop in that the two intelligence officers involved know immediately that the information has been successfully exchanged. Other brush contacts can involve the exchange of shopping trolleys in a supermarket or the classic swap of identical briefcases in toilets or under a table.
Yeah, I thought that was great. I mean, the point of view of using the bus stop worked very well, because I know one of the takes we did, a bus actually drove in front of the camera, so it actually obscured the drop, which is just absolutely ideal, it really is. But yeah, well done. I mean, it was just a question of making sure it's subtly dropped into the bag, and that I thought worked very well here.
Coming up in part 2, David Shaler reveals how cornflakes can help tell if you're under surveillance, and we speak to the last journalist to interview British traitor Kim Philby before his death. Still to come on Spy School, how a poison cream nearly spelled the end for Russian writer Alexander Solzhenitsyn in The Assassination Files, and find out why the KGB used London graveyards to exchange secret documents.
If you have something that the security services want, they'll stop at nothing to get it, including burgling your flat. Here are some of the methods that you can use to find out if they have. If you're trying to conceal sensitive material in your flat, don't advertise its location by putting a very obvious padlock on the drawer that it's in. If you are going to use techniques to try and catch out the intelligence services or the police, don't use the ones known to them. The piece of green string trapped between the door and its frame is known to every service in the world. Similarly, if you have a pile of papers like this and you're going to put a mark on them so you know that they've been disturbed, don't do it here because anybody can see it. Do it on this side. Another technique that's come about because of the internet is the webcam. If you leave your computer on and connected to the internet, the webcam will photograph anybody who is in your flat, and they won't be able to delete the photographs that have been taken because they've been sent elsewhere. Another place where you're likely to find evidence of intruders is in fact the bathroom. No matter how careful they are, they may have used the toilet and forgotten to flush. If you are going to use the hair technique, leaving a pube or a hair from your head on the toilet seat can be a great trap because people aren't expecting to see it there. Sometimes the simplest techniques are the best, like using a bowl of cornflakes to see if intruders have been in your home. What you do, you get a mat and sprinkle your cornflakes underneath it. Then anybody who walks into your home and treads on the mat will break the cornflakes. And the final rule of spying, leave your place in a mess. It's much more difficult for anyone searching it to put things back in the same place. And if you really want to catch them out, take a Polaroid. Then check your room next to the Polaroid when you get back, and you'll know if anything's moved.
Discard. A discard is an agent whom an intelligence service will allow to be exposed in order to protect the identity of a more valuable agent. The idea is that the enemy will assume that it has uncovered all the spies, when in fact the most valuable ones are still at work. Now we head across to southern Russia for the Assassination Files. In 1971, something rather odd happened to dissident writer Alexander Solzhenitsyn while he was out shopping. An attempt on his life.
Alexander Solzhenitsyn fought in World War II, achieving the rank of captain, but he was arrested for the ultimate crime in 1945, writing a letter in which he criticized Soviet dictator Joseph Stalin. He spent 8 years in the gulags. Rehabilitated in 1956, he was allowed to settle in central Russia, where he became a mathematics teacher. Encouraged by de-Stalinizing policies of the early 60s, Solzhenitsyn wrote a short novel describing the life of an inmate of a forced labor camp during the Stalin era. The novel was widely acclaimed by the people, and Solzhenitsyn became an instant celebrity. But the Kremlin, under new leader Nikita Khrushchev, disapproved of this dissident behavior. Nevertheless, Solzhenitsyn continued to write, and in 1970 was awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature. It was decided he must be stopped. In 1971, the author went shopping to a department store in Rostov-on-Don. He left the store unaware that he had been the victim of a KGB assassination attempt. Reports claim the weapon was a poison jelly rubbed onto Solzhenitsyn's skin while he was standing at a counter. The symptoms are consistent with poisoning by ricin. Some hours later, blisters and burns erupted all over his skin. He was bedridden for 3 months, but managed to survive the attempt on his life. Solzhenitsyn believed his first wife cooperated with the KGB to harm him. Indeed, she allowed her own memoirs to be doctored by the secret police to discredit his writings. When Solzhenitsyn published the Gulag Archipelago, he was arrested, charged with treason, and exiled from the Soviet Union on the following day. It was not until 1994, after the fall of communism, that he returned home.
The Cambridge spy ring is probably the most notorious spy network in the world. In the 1930s, Kim Philby, Donald MacLean, Guy Burgess and Anthony Blunt were Cambridge University students with a shared love of homosexuality, communism and a dream to wreck the entire capitalist system. It's all down to the KGB who exploited these characteristics and recruited them as Soviet agents. I went to meet journalist Philip Knightley, who knew Kim Philby personally. So Philip, you're the only journalist ever to have interviewed Kim Philby. What was he like?
A fascinating man. I'd been writing to him for 25 years, a couple of times a year, saying, how about an interview? And then suddenly in 1988 he said, yes, okay, come on over. So I went over to Moscow and there he was, the greatest spy in the history of espionage, standing at the door to his Moscow flat in his carpet slippers and his cardi, and we spent the next week together.
So who exactly was Kim Philby?
Well, back in the 30s there were groups of young left-wing students at Cambridge who felt that the world was going to become a terrible place unless somebody stood up to Nazi Germany. And the only country at that time that showed any sort of spirit for the fight against Nazism was communist Russia. They were recruited one by one into what was called at the time the Comintern, the Communist International, who then passed them on to the KGB, and they became the most effective spy ring in the history of espionage. And Philby was the sort of leader of that group.
How damaging do you think their spying was to the Western agencies?
Well, Philby alone, he wasn't just recruited as a spy for the KGB. The British then recruited him to work for the British Secret Service.
Right.
So you had this amazing situation of a KGB officer being a leading officer, a senior officer in the British Secret Intelligence Service. So everything that Britain did, called espionage war against communism, was betrayed before it even began. And Philby was well on the way to becoming perhaps the head of the British Intelligence Service, a coup unheard of in the history of espionage.
So what sort of information would Philby be handing over to the KGB?
He knew everything that the CIA and SIS and other Western intelligence services were doing in the Soviet Union. He knew what agents they were recruiting, he knew what operations they were mounting.
And how damaging was that?
Well, it negated every single operation that the West mounted against the Soviet Union during that period, from the time that Philby first got in there until he was exposed in 1963 and fled.
What happened to him in the end? What became of Kim Philby?
I interviewed him in January 1988 and he died in May.
Was he happy living over there?
I think he enjoyed his life. He had a beautiful flat. He had a young wife, a young Russian wife. He missed Leon Perrin's sauce, a few little things like that. Yeah.
Other than that, no regrets?
No regrets whatsoever. He died a happy man.
For the final part of our lesson in information exchange, we went to the Holy Trinity Church in Brompton Road, London. This site was revealed by Oleg Gordievsky as a favoured spot of the KGB for making their dead letter drops in the 1980s.
They chose this area as it was conveniently close to the Soviet embassy and because they thought they'd pinned down 2 very secure spots to hide their film canisters. The sites we're visiting were considered by Soviet intelligence to be the 2 safest locations for a dead letter box in all London.
The first of those is behind me in the Brompton Oratory. If you actually go into the building and turn right, there's an altar right there. Just around the back of that is some little columns, and they used to place their microfilm and their film canisters behind there to be retrieved at a later date by another agent.
The second location was right next to the Brompton Oratory in the gardens of the Holy Trinity Church. Now there's a statue of Francis of Assisi, as you can see behind me, and this area used to be fenced off. The KGB used to drop their film canisters between the fence that surrounded the statue and this tree right here. If an agent wanted to let Moscow Center, which was the Soviet intelligence headquarters, know that he was going to make a dead letter drop, he'd come to this lamppost in Mayfair's Audley Square and make a blue chalk mark.
Once they'd noticed the mark, Moscow Center would make their own chalk mark here on this bench in St George's Gardens just around the corner, and the dead letter drop would be made.
Having made the drop, the agent would then return to the lamppost and erase the chalk mark.
Moscow Center would then erase the mark on the bench once they picked up the delivery at the church.
Unfortunately, neither of the locations was all that secure, as the rogue agent Oleg Gordievsky passed on their locations to the British Secret Services, who managed to intercept many of their secret messages back in the 80s.
So the locations weren't as safe-tied as they thought.
Bad luck, Ruskies.